In the freezing, unforgiving expanse of the North Atlantic, Captain Karl Von Steiger commanded the U-217, a vessel he proudly dubbed the Iron Shark. It was a marvel of German engineering, a silent hunter that had already sent a dozen Allied merchant ships to the bottom of the ocean. Von Steiger didn't merely see himself as a naval officer, he considered himself an apex predator, and the vast, dark ocean was his private hunting ground. To him, the Allied sailors above were not formidable enemies, they were simply prey, navigating rusty, slow-moving targets, merely waiting for their inevitable turn to drown. He genuinely believed that the superior technology and training of the Third Reich had elevated him to a god of the sea, utterly untouchable by the amateurs and relics of the American Navy. His arrogance was not just a personality trait, it was an article of faith. Above the tumultuous waves, the USS Vigilant bravely battled the relentless storm. She was an aging ship, visibly scarred by previous battles, and seemingly held together by sheer willpower and a desperate crew. Her commander, Bill Miller, possessed neither the cutting-edge sensors nor the sleek, formidable lines of Von Steiger's state-of-the-art submarine. What he did have was a crew comprised of resilient farm boys and city kids, commanding a ship that groaned and rattled with every crashing wave. To the Germans, observing through their advanced periscopes, the Vigilant was a pathetic joke, a rusty relic of a bygone era that by all accounts should have been scrapped years ago. They laughed at the Americans' seemingly erratic steering, dismissing it as clumsy and utterly pathetic. They never once considered that Miller wasn't lost. He was in fact laying a carefully calculated trap, using his ship's apparent weakness as an irresistible lure. Von Steiger watched, a hunter savoring the moment as the American destroyer began its dramatic falter. "Look at them," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Their engines are as tired and pathetic as their spirits." He interpreted the billowing smoke and the rapidly decreasing speed as an undeniable sign of critical weakness, an open invitation to move in for what he perceived would be an effortless, easy kill. His senior officers, more cautious, subtly urged restraint, suggesting it might be a deceptive ruse, but Von Steiger's immense ego was deaf to such warnings. He scoffed, convinced the Americans were too unsophisticated, too primitive in their thinking to attempt such a complex deception. In his inflated mind, he was a grand master meticulously playing chess against a mere child, a fool easily outmaneuvered. He confidently ordered the U-boat to surface just enough to prepare the torpedoes, utterly convinced the Americans were too blind and incompetent to detect his presence. Von Steiger's gravest error was his unwavering belief in his own myth of absolute invisibility. He foolishly assumed that because his U-boat was designed for stealth, the Americans were inherently deaf to his every move. With booming confidence, he ordered his men to quickly reload the torpedo tubes, the loud, resonant mechanical noises echoing unnervingly through the very structure of the U-boat and radiating outwards into the vast ocean. Above him, Commander Miller's vigilant sonar operator, aided by the crude but effective hydrophones, heard every distinct clank, every metallic slide, and every hushed German command. While Von Steiger was preoccupied with celebrating his perfect approach and gloating over his perceived tactical genius, the Americans were meticulously mapping his exact, precise position. They weren't relying on high-tech, cutting-edge sensors. They were utilizing their honed ears, their profound understanding of how sound propagates in cold, deep water, and a patient, almost primal awareness, a set of skills Von Steiger deemed beneath his superior concern. "Achtung! Fire!" Von Steiger's voice boomed with unshakable conviction, absolutely certain that the two steel fish would tear the American destroyer in half, marking another swift victory. He watched intently through the periscope, his breath held in anticipation, waiting for the deafening explosion that would confirm his undeniable superiority. But then, At the very last, agonizing second, the clumsy American destroyer, with a surprising surge of power, abruptly pivoted and surged forward, its rudder swinging hard to port. The torpedoes missed their mark by mere feet, harmlessly disappearing into the dark, churning abyss. Von Steiger froze, his smug smile dissolving into a mask of utter bewilderment. He simply could not comprehend how the outdated American vessel could have moved so rapidly, so precisely. He defiantly refused to believe it was due to any skill on their part, rationalizing it away as stupid American luck. His overwhelming arrogance prevented him from truly seeing that he had just fired at a phantom, a seemingly vulnerable ghost that was now rapidly transforming into a relentless, avenging demon. In a heartbeat, the roles were savagely reversed. The tired and clumsy American ship, dismissed as an easy target, was now charging with the ferocity of a wounded bull. Commander Miller, his face grim and determined, no longer needed a periscope to locate his prey. He simply followed the unmistakable white wakes of the torpedoes back to their precise source. Below, inside the U-boat, the smug laughter of Von Steiger and his crew had abruptly ceased, replaced by the chilling, frantic shouts of "Alarm! Dive! Dive! Dive!" Von Steiger's face, moments ago filled with arrogant triumph, was now a pale mask of dawning fear as he realized with horrifying clarity that he had lingered on the surface for a critical second too long. He had fatally underestimated the Americans' reaction time, erroneously believing they were too slow, too inept to strike back effectively. Now, the vast, dark ocean was no longer his boundless hunting ground. It was a treacherous trap, rapidly, relentlessly closing around him, ready to claim its formidable prize. The sky began to rain iron, and the ocean became a furious maelstrom of fire and water. Miller's crew worked with the precision of men who had performed this dance of death 100 times, rolling the heavy drums off the racks with grim efficiency. Below the waves, the world transformed into a nightmare of sound and fury. Each explosion was a colossal hammer blow against the submarine's hull, shaking the German sailors like rag dolls. Von Steiger clung desperately to the periscope stand, his ears ringing, his mind unable to grasp how this rusty bucket was hitting him with such surgical accuracy. He had dismissed the Americans as amateurs, yet they were proving to be masters of the one thing he feared most, the brutal, crushing weight of the sea, which they were now directing squarely at him. His perceived invincibility was peeling away with each new shockwave that stripped paint from his pride. The Iron Shark was bleeding. The boasted superior German steel groaned under the crushing pressure of the deep, its hull twisting like a soda can in a giant's hand. Water, cold as ice and sharp as a knife, was flooding every compartment. Von Steiger shouted orders, desperately attempting to reassert his authority, but his voice lacked the sharp certainty it had held just an hour prior. He looked around his beloved U-boat and for the first time saw it for what it truly was in that moment, a metal coffin rapidly sinking. He had bragged incessantly about the indestructible nature of his vessel, yet here it was, failing him because he had steered it into a battle he believed he could not possibly lose. The true cost of his pride was being measured in every gallon of seawater pouring through the expanding cracks, while the acrid smell of chlorine gas from damaged batteries began to slowly permeate the corridors, signaling an inescapable end. Desperate, von Steiger attempted one last desperate trick from his naval manual. He dove deeper, aiming for the thermal layers where the abrupt temperature change would bend and scatter sonar pulses, hoping to cloak his escape. He was absolutely convinced that the Americans, with their primitive equipment, would utterly fail to understand the complex physics of the deep. But Miller didn't rely on pings. He knew the Atlantic like the back of his hand, a lifetime of experience etched into his instincts. He listened to the faint singing of the pipes and the subtle, damaged thrum of the U-boat's failing propellers. He didn't need cutting-edge technology to pinpoint von Steiger. He needed his honed intuition and an innate understanding of the sea. He waited, silent and incredibly patient, hovering directly above the very spot where von Steiger believed he was perfectly invisible. The German captain thought he was hiding in the shadows, not realizing he himself had become the shadow Miller held firmly in his crosshairs. The final blow was silent for an agonizing second, then deafening. The depth charges detonated directly beneath the U-boat's stern, shattering the rudder and turning the propellers into useless, twisted metal. The submarine lost all forward momentum, tilting sharply upwards like a mortally wounded whale attempting to surface. Inside, the lights flickered and died for good, replaced by the terrifying sound of rushing water and screaming, tortured metal. Von Steiger fell to his knees in the dark, the acrid smell of acid from the damaged batteries filling his lungs. He had arrogantly called the Americans clumsy, yet they had just executed a surgically precise attack in the middle of a dark, stormy ocean. His proud iron shark was now a paralyzed hunk of iron, rapidly sinking into the crushing abyss, as he finally realized there was no escape. With the air rapidly running out and the hull facing imminent collapse, von Steiger had no choice but to blow his tanks and desperately head for the surface. The U-boat erupted from the depths like a drowning man gasping for his last breath. As von Steiger painstakingly climbed out of the hatch, he found himself staring directly up at the rusted, salt-stained side of the USS Vigilant. The very ship he had mocked relentlessly, the vessel he had contemptuously called a relic, was now his absolute master. He looked up at the American sailors lining the deck. Their faces were not smug or triumphant, but grim, tired, and determined. His iron shark was a shattered wreck, bobbing helplessly in the waves, a stark testament to the heavy price of profoundly underestimating an enemy. His arrogance had been his blindfold, and now the harsh truth glared directly into his face. The capture was swift and subdued. Von Steiger, once the proud, dominant predator of the Atlantic, was now merely a shivering prisoner on the deck of a rusty bucket. He watched, a profound emptiness in his eyes, as his U-boat vanished into the dark depths, carrying with it his ambitions and his fatal delusions. He understood, too late, that the Americans had not triumphed because of superior steel or faster engines. They had won because they had not underestimated him. They had respected his lethality, and in doing so, they had discovered a way to utterly destroy it. As the Vigilant sailed onward through the remaining storm, the stark lesson was unequivocally clear. Victory at sea was not claimed by the one with the newest charts, but by the one with the profound wisdom never to believe in their own invincibility. An empire built on hubris had just sunk, rivet by painstaking rivet, into the cold embrace of oblivion.